You're sitting.
Go.
I'm here. Well, good morning, everyone. Despite Yuen pub crawling yesterday and everyone is nice and up and breezy. I've been to innovfest for a few years now, and I think in this year, I must congratulate Unbound and Analyse Enterprise. I think it's a fantastic show. I can feel the excitement and the vibrancy of the event. My name is Chng, and I've been covering the technology scene in Singapore and in the region for a mighty long time. Never mind, we'll leave that aside. We have 30 minutes today, so in the interest of time, I want to ensure we have a good discussion. So I will quickly introduce the panel, and then we can start the discussion going. On my left is Dr. Lily Chan. She is no stranger to many of you. She is the CEO of Analyse Enterprise and co-chair of innovfest Unbound. She leads the most successful overseas startup internship program for university students a year. I think about 1,000 students have gone out. 2,000 students, she corrects, since what, 15 years?
15 years.
15 years, yes. And on her left is Mr. Poon Yuen, who is the CEO of Spring Singapore. He was very modest in our conversation just now. He says he helps companies grow. But in fact, he holds one of the larger purses for funding for startups. And on his left is Shirley Wong. Shirley is a corporate executive, investor, and past industry chairman of the Singapore IT Federation. She has been in the industry, I wouldn't say how many years, anyway, but she's experienced. And here is Barak from Israel. He has served in the Israeli Air Force, but he tells me he is not a pilot, but he's in the special forces. So I think he carries guns. Anyway, we shall start today. The topic is why governments need startups. So I will ask Lily to start the ball rolling. Lily, tell us, startups, governments provide the infrastructure, the regulation, the legal framework, and in Singapore's instance, they also support a lot of startups. I think everything is in a good intention, but the devil is in the details. So perhaps you can share with us, in your experience, what are some of the details that are missing?
So you do need governments to help initiate and spur certain things, and there are certain areas. I'm always very ambiguous. When you talk about startups, it means, to put it locally, a lot of these things bo jing hu, meaning there's no government involvement. But on the other hand, you do need government involvement to come in a small country like Singapore. So devil is in the details. Sometimes too much interventions may not be too good, because the intentions are all very good. And all my colleagues know me, I'm quite outspoken. When startups start to grow, we have to let them grow. We need to facilitate and let them grow. We shouldn't be saying, okay, you apply and you should have IP in your startup, you should have this in your startup. Intentions are all good. And then we start funds that say we will fund. I'm not saying we did that in Singapore, but I'm just giving hypothetical examples. We start funds that say, all right, let's fund some startups that have IP, and we're ready to put in $30 million and things like that. But think about it. When a startup has come to a stage that needs $30 million, whose money will they take? So I think we need to think about all this. I think we need to have a lot of avenues where the government has set up a lot of avenues for startups to tap on, but I think we should not be too prescriptive in how we do things.
Right,
it's no criticism. But just speaking, from where it is, I think we have been very successful in creating and allowing the startup community to flourish. Many of you are aware of Block 71. It started organically from the ground, and then when things started to go on, I think the great thing is every agency gets involved, and that further sustained the startup movement in Singapore. Question now is, what next? Startups are startups. What next?
Thank you, Lily. So Mr. Poon will take note of that. Maybe he can answer that, respond to that a little later. But moving over to Shirley, from your perspective, you are an investor, an angel, a corporate executive, industry promoter. So from your perspective, why do governments need startups?
I think it's a known fact that startup needs the government, right, for funding, whatever. But I think in today's terms, I would say the government needs the startup more than the startup needs the government. Why I say so? I think I feel that startup in today, they are actually the heart of our very vibrant economy. Just open up the newspaper, every day. Even our national, on TV or even on the newspaper, there is always a section featuring startups, new innovation. And even look at our various ministers' speeches, in the last 1 year or so, starting from, our Prime Minister to even our budget speeches. You find that it is always dotted about having enterprises, fostering partnership with various parties, and more importantly, encouraging our enterprise to drive innovation. To me, startup is the driver of innovation. They drive innovation. And without them, I think, especially for our SMEs, I think they will need our startups to help them. Even for large corporates today, they are not nimble enough, or perhaps they need the startups to help them to drive, some of their innovation strategy. And more importantly, I feel the government needs the startup because the government cannot take risks. Risk-taking is not in their DNA. And they need the startups to take the risk, all right? Come on, we all know, right? The government cannot fail. The media is merciless. The public, they will chastise the government if they ever make a mistake. There's no room for experimentation, and they need the startup to do that. And I'm actually very happy to see that the government today is actually creating the environment to allow the startups, to play, such as various sandboxes is being created. And what that means is that, to me, the way I see is government says that, okay, I give you the playground, you can play with it. They stay at the viewing gallery to see, how it plays out. And, and then perhaps they might be making their own bets, behind and see which startups might emerge to be the leader. And then after that, they will come down of the gallery and then, start so-called regulate or manage the startup. But I think that is the reality today. And that actually, to me, basically means the government needs the startup to drive this very vibrant economy today.
Thank you, Shirley. That's very insightful. Barak, from your perspective as a tech strategic advisor to MNCs, what is your perspective on this?
So first of all, I think as Ms. Shirley said, that the government needs startups for many reasons. anything from employment, connectivity, spreading information, disruption of traditional thinking, right? I think Albert Einstein said it, that we can't solve problems with the same kind of thinking that we used when we created them. So this is why we have, for multinational corporations and CVCs, today you see them more and more, corporate VCs, what they require is, they are big corporations, right? As you said here, it's impossible for them to make such big shifts. They have boards, they have stocks. Every movement can actually have a huge effect, right? So we can see them as a big boat, a big ship, with startup as speedboats, going to different places and exploring different ventures. So we can use sandboxes, we can use small programs that corporations are using in connection with the startups, and government can support it. One of the major things for governments to do, besides of course programs to support startups, enable startup connectivity with other organizations or units within the private sector, and with the government, with the universities, tech transfer units. A lot of universities find it as a huge profitable business if they actually allocate the resources in a different way than it used to be in the past. In the past, every researcher just had a budget, and he basically had the opportunity to explore whatever he wanted to research. But if the universities can take this capability and guide them, what is required, what is the need in the market, then they can actually give a much better, broader view for the researcher and to create something that is actually required. Startups, for me, are everything that the government cannot do. They are flexible and fast, and when you are that small, you should use your disadvantage, if I can say so, and basically create treat them as an advantage. And a government being so, some governments can be slower than others, but definitely slower than startups and more rigid. They need policies, and this is another thing that government can support to startups, providing more policies. So I don't expect governments to go for bidding with taking only startups, because they're looking for many years ahead. But if they can provide certain capabilities or programs to support those startups, to integrate them, they will assist the small and medium enterprises in any place in the country. They will allow them to go from offline to online. They will support them from going to where they are right now in every part of the country. Today they have only 1, 5, 10 customers. Tomorrow they have all the country. Then the day after they have all the region. Expansion can only be growth with global and digital world.
Thank you, Barak. So, Mr. Poon, so we have heard from the panelists, Singapore's startup scene has grown over the last, 7 to 10 years. So what's next for some of these companies who started 5, 6 years ago? And then $30 million, who's going to put that kind of a money in a startup? Do we have an organization or a structure to help do this, Mr. Poon?
Well, that's not an easy question to answer, but maybe just address some of the issues that were mentioned. In terms of why we need startups, I thought it's pretty obvious. Jobs, government always concerned about creating good jobs. We think startups do create good jobs, maybe not in the mold of what we think are traditionally good, stable jobs, but nevertheless, jobs that require a lot of drive, initiative, and allows for a lot of growth and development. So we think as a source of good jobs, very important, source of innovation and economic activity, as some speakers have mentioned, so definitely. But coming to your question, I'll answer it maybe a bit indirectly, because you introduced me by saying that we hold one of the largest purses for startup development. And I think Shirley mentioned that startups need government support. Actually, I think that's not ideal. that is not ideal. The ideal situation is that government is only in the background, maybe plugging small holes here and there, addressing small gaps here and there, but the ideal is that the startup ecosystem and landscape thrive without government. That's the best. And even for addressing of gaps, I do think it cannot be done all at the same time. Startup development, the landscape development is I think necessarily sometimes sequential. So for example, just look at funding. You can't possibly at the start of our development look at everything from pre-seed to seed to series A, B, C, D, E. Because the series B investor will look at the landscape and say, you don't even have enough seed deals for me to, not enough pipeline for me to look at. So I think at the start, we looked at developing pre-seed, seed, and now we're looking at developing the more later stage sort of funding gaps. And that's how it will develop. And I think that is government's role for now. We facilitate, we try to address gaps, but hopefully more and more the private sector will come in and the whole startup development will take a life of its own.
Can I interject what he just said?
Okay.
Yes, Shirley, please.
You know, yes, the government needs the startup, but as I said earlier, startup also need the government, and the VCs also would like to see how the government support the startup. In order to have the capital that comes in, first they will see, like for example, we want the big, capital, right? The VCs that comes in to invest in the Series B, C, and beyond. But when they come in, they also want to see, is the ground fertile? Whether are there sufficient startups, quality startups, that qualifies that. And I would say and that's why we say seed stage. Seed basically means seeding. Now your role, your job, you just said that is to help grow the companies. And that is, of course, other than, there are many stages, many different types of enterprises. Startups is one category of it. And we need the support from the government to actually support the seed stage level kind of a startup. And if you do sufficient, and I think that is where, VCs will start coming in because they know that, there is sufficient government support. But of course, I don't think at Series B and beyond, they probably need less of the government. In fact, I think it should be like what you said, much driven, by the market itself, right? But at the early stage, I think the government has to play a very significant role in nurturing them and supporting.
Yes,
Yeah, I just want to comment.
Put more money.
I just want to comment to what you said. Actually, what Shirley described was the valley of death. That's exactly the part where the risk is too high for the private sector to take by himself and to actually support the startups. For me, however, governments, they can't solve all the problems. As much as we would really want them to do that, governments cannot solve all the problems. Government cannot be everywhere all the time. And startups can. They can be anywhere. They start from the need. They come and they basically solve the small need that starts in this area and they solve it. However, yes, they do have a lot of risk inside. So that's why government support is very important. But I do believe that private sector needs to play a higher role in that. It's not just government. Government cannot take all the risk and government cannot put all the money.
Yeah.
For me, a good balance would be government sharing the risk with the private sector of exploring new ventures.
Yes.
When you go into new uncharted territories, you still need to have somebody to support you.
Absolutely.
So the big boat of the government is really helping, but the private sector needs to steer it. At the end of the day, any country is not dependent on the government. It depends on the private sector. Any GDP for any country, the growth depends on the private sector. So government role is to support, to provide a nurturing ecosystem. Academia private sector, and government to provide the policies that will enable the startup to operate and some programs with funding. But at the end of the day, it's the startups and the private sector that would have to lead the way.
So if I may
Please.
interject, I think we describe a very ideal ecosystem where the government co-share risk with VCs, startups are funded, Series B, Series C investors, government still co-share the risk and things like that. So that's a very ideal ecosystem. The reality in Singapore is that we're very impatient. So my job at the university is to get as many young people as possible interested to do startups. I have to talk to their parents. It's okay, your son doesn't want to be a doctor, your son wants to be a startup founder. We'll make more money than the doctor someday. So these are the things that I have to tell parents, right? And the situation in Singapore is we're not mature yet. We have VCs who have taken risks with government monies. We've got new government investment funds coming out. We've got lots of external monies, potentially money coming in. With a less mature ecosystem, what else is needed to make this ecosystem thrive? I feel from the government perspective, investments need to be looked at from a developmental perspective. So even if it's risk capital put in, it needs to be looked at as a developmental objective so that it is not measured. Fund managers who are managing government funds, put aside for this, are not measured on a commercial return on investment. If we have developmental funds put aside and willing to take the bet on a few deep tech companies, let's say, and prepared to fund it 10 million, 20 million, 30 million to a certain stage, I think that's what is missing in the Singapore ecosystem today. I think if we can get to that stage, we can then really attract the top VC monies who are willing to put monies into such technologies in Singapore. Having been in the ecosystem for more than 20 years, I'm still harping on that point. A developmental investment fund based on a return on investment which is modest. You don't lose taxpayers' money, of course, but with a long-term view to build the cutting-edge, world-class companies that Singapore can do. Just think, Singapore Airlines, many of our telco companies, the Sembawang group of companies, the ST group of companies, we were willing to take those risks back in those days. Why are we not willing to do that today? So I just feel this is something that we need to put the monies in.
But Lily, it's interesting that you mentioned Singapore Airlines because, we know the story that Mr. Lee Kuan Yew always reminds SIA that, look, I don't need a national carrier. The day you don't make money, I'll shut you down.
Yes.
And I think that is one of the very important reasons why SIA is successful. So I'm a bit nervous. I love Lily, but I'm a bit nervous when people say that we should have funds that are a bit more patient, a bit less financially concerned about financials. I'm a bit nervous because I think the discipline is needed. Sure, we need to invest in deep tech, so we need funds that understand that deep tech needs longer runway, needs more patience, as you say. But if we start telling our startups that, look, you shouldn't be too concerned about making financial returns for your investors, then I think the discipline we'll lose it.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying that we should be telling them that. I'm saying that.
And I'm sure, Lily, you know, as a VC, as I was for a short while, making money, if you just focus on making money, it's already very, very hard. If you start telling the VC that, besides making money, you should also consider this objective, that objective, it just makes it exponentially harder.
No, I'm not saying that we should be looking all of it like that, and we should actually be focusing, I feel, in a couple of areas that we really want to build in Singapore.
Sure.
And think about it in a slightly different way than totally from a VC perspective. I feel we're not there.
You
And
know,
VCs ask this question,
Sure.
where are your deep
And the
tech
way I look at it, I
companies?
think
Yeah.
maybe Shirley should be on the government side and I should be on the private sector side. Because the way I see it, government, like you say, government is not in the best position to say what are the 2-3 areas we should invest in. I think government plays a role. I think in Israel's case, for example, they are driver for what we will call lead demand, right? Because they have, government has a need for certain special technologies, so they drive certain demand of technologies from startups. And there's sometimes startups get their start from there. In terms of putting in money for research in deep tech areas, definitely government has to play that role. No matter how mature the economy is, I think even in the US, government puts in a lot of money into basic and deep research. I think that's needed. But what I think government should play a lesser role is in deciding who or what we should invest in. That should be a private sector role. We can support, we can facilitate, and don't get me wrong, I think I agree with Lily that we are probably not at a very mature stage that the government can so-called take a very backseat role, unfortunately in my view. But I think in the ideal situation, private sector should be making all the decisions and all the government is facilitating and making sure that our institutions are strong and that we operate on the rule of law and nothing else, and that the investors and startups are treated fairly and so on and so forth. That's
Actually,
what
if you were to look at the CFE report, I'm just taking a leaf from the CFE report,
Yeah.
I feel that the government has already starting to cherry pick on the sector that they think there is a growth area that needs further development and more support. In fact, in various schemes that they sometimes when the government roll out certain scheme like the TEXA, the Tech Skill Accelerator, they also cherry pick maybe I shouldn't use cherry pick, but they based on the data that they know that the needs, they already identify what are the different kind of job roles, skill sets, and then because we cannot solve all the problems that is. So they start to pick different sectors that they see that there is a more that needs more support and further development.
If I can just say that, first of all, for me, you mentioned the Israeli government. For us, necessity is the mother of invention, right? We had the desert, we had problems with agricultural. Just an example, in the end of the 1980s, Israel had 20% of agricultural workers, farmers, and we produced a certain amount of produce. And 30 years forward, we have only 1.5% working in agriculture, but those 1.5% are doing 3 times more products than the 20% used to do 30 years ago. So first of all, for me, that's technology and invention, innovation, right? Also with desert, you have a problem of not having enough water, create water, desalination, wastewater treatment, water treatment. Many ways to create, so it's all in your mind, right? We are only limited by our dreams and capability to imagine. So for me, these are the things. Dr. Lily said about the programs. So Israel started in 1991 a program that's called Initiative, Yozma in Hebrew.
Yes.
And basically, this is the exact program that both of you were talking about. It's a governmental funds. We were looking for VCs. The VCs needed to match the money, right? So it's not just something that the government puts and all the risk is on the government. The VCs will risk their own money. The government basically bridging the gap and bridging the risk and allowing them to invest. By the way, that's what created the whole ecosystem in Israel for investment today. And for me, this is much wiser. You mentioned, Ms. Poo, about the private sector needs to do all the decision. The private sector needs to do most of the decisions, okay? And in Israel, the government puts within the incubators program under the chief scientist, by the way, amazing results, really. Percentages of success rate. In the past 25 years that the program was operating, Israel had approximately 2,000 startups. 1,700 succeeded to go to first and second round of investments. These are amazing numbers in any startups, numbers and statistics. So for me, the government paying or taking the toll of risking, the private sector still needs to take the step forward and basically put his own money on the table. Otherwise, they have no burden. They have no, if they lose the money, they lose the money. We are not against failure. Israelis are very familiar to failure. Failure is okay. Everybody fail, and people will fail. The important thing is, A, try to fail small, right? The second thing is try not to fail on the same mistake twice. If you do that, maybe you didn't learn the lesson from the first go. But startups will fail, and it's okay that they fail. And the government needs to take this risk to assist them, as well as the private sector. And for me, this will be a nurturing ecosystem, and they will create new things.
Well, thank you very much. It has been a very interesting discussion. I wish this could go on for another hour, but I think we are ran out of time already. Interesting discussion. Yes, governments need startups because the startups provide the innovation, creativity, and the agility, but governments provide the framework on which startups can operate. They ask them many things that governments can do. The developmental fund, question mark, can we go forward with that? Well, thank you very much, Lily, Mr. Poon, Shirley, and Barak, and thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Grace and her panel.